able to cover that. So anyways, I think we are going live now. So I think so idea is we'll take a minute or two, just wait while people file on in, basically, because not usually a great idea to start before anyone actually has a chance to come on in. So yeah. Okay, so I have all the clips you mentioned. I was looking at the looks like the opinion piece by Andre Demise is actually it's paywalled, so I don't know if I'm gonna be able to pull it up. Let me see if Outline maybe would let me do that. But if not, it isn't the end of the world. No, it's not supported. Okay. All right. So that's not the end of the world. Okay. So there we go. We got 4 people in, so we're all good. Okay. So hello and welcome to the 4th The Canada Files Canada news stream. So I'm Aidan Jonah, editor-in-chief of the Canada Files, and I am joined today by Sarah Jama. So Sarah, could you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Hey everyone, thanks for having me here today. My name is Sarah. I'm an organizer from Hamilton, Ontario. I'm co-founder of the Disability Justice Network of Ontario. Hamilton has the largest density of people with disabilities in the province of Ontario, so that's where we're located. And the purpose of the organization is to build the political capacity in young people with disabilities to build the world that they want to see and hold institutions responsible for the spaces that they create. And so a lot of our work is politicizing young people with disabilities, specifically racialized youth with disabilities, to sort of learn how to build out theories of change and challenge systems.
All right, terrific. And yet again, I can't thank you enough for coming on. So the major thing and the reason why I want to bring you on is basically there has been and I wasn't aware of this until activists made sure to basically put this out in the public eye. So I'm grateful to them for that. The MAID bill that I think was this introduced in the Senate or was this introduced in the House first?
So it was introduced in the House around 18 months ago, and then passed at Parliament. And then usually how decisions are made around bills is like it has to pass at the House, then get sent up to the Senate, which is like an arbitrary appointed board of people. And then it has to pass at Senate because the House bill and the Senate bill have to match. And then it gets sent to the Governor General for final approval, and then it gets turned into law. And so do you mind if I explain what happened?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
There was this case. Right now, we already have MAID in legislation, medical assistance in dying. But how it's framed is you can only access medical assistance in dying if you're terminally ill. And you're on the way, your death is foreseeable. That's how it's phrased in the bill. So in Quebec, a gentleman named Truchon and a woman named Nicole Gladue, they both were involved in a charter case because they weren't foreseeably dying, but there were people with disabilities who wanted the right to die. And so that was sent to Parliament, the Supreme Court, or whatever, a court, sorry. I'm not sure about all the lingo, but a court in Quebec decided that it should be law for people with disabilities to be able to apply to die because they argued that it's someone's human right. And so what happened is over the course of 16 months, Parliament has had to create this Bill C-17, which is an amendment bill to Bill C-14, the original MAID version, that says if you're not dying, well, you can still access medical assistance in dying if you're disabled. It's not open to everybody. It's just people who have a disability that's deemed irredeemable, or like whatever constitutes suffering. You can apply to access this bill, this piece of legislation, and then die. And so what happened over the last 16 months is that went to the government. The government usually appeals decisions made by lesser courts. This time they didn't appeal it. And it's one of the fastest changes to the criminal law that I've ever seen, our constitution. in 16 months. And so it was debated, went through first reading, second reading, third reading, and in December, the House passed it. And so now it's in the phase where it's being debated by Senate. The House passed it. It was Conservatives and NDP and Liberal predominantly voted it up. Most of the Conservatives voted it down. And now Senate is arguing over changes to Bill C-17 that they want to send back to the House. There are a number of alarming changes that Senate made to Bill C-7. And one of the most alarming changes is that they want to open it up even farther to allow people with mental illnesses to apply to access MAID and die. Now, I'm not against medical assistance in dying. I'm not against Bill C-14, the original iteration of this. What concerns me about Bill C-7, which Parliament passed before even the changes from Senate, the problem with it is it opens up dying for people with disabilities without really attacking or providing solutions to the reasons people with disabilities would want to die if we're suffering, right? If you're not on the way to dying already. So extreme poverty. We've seen since the beginning of the pandemic that people with disabilities, especially on ODSP, can't afford to live. The ODSP and social assistance across this country is not enough to survive on with rent and food. So number one, people are legislated into poverty. Number two, it's ableist. It sets up this idea that if you were disabled, you're suffering more than an able-bodied person. If it wasn't framed to be ableist, then they would have opened it to any Canadian who was suffering. But there's something about disability that they have matched with this idea of suffering in this bill. And the United Nations actually put out like a 7-page document explaining to the government that this is ableist and against international human rights. And yet our government still went along past it, even progressives, and then it's being debated in Senate. The third problem with this is like Truchon in the original charter case and Gladue were both eligible for MAID under C-14, the original version of C-14, outside of Quebec. So regardless of all this stuff with this bill, like Quebec would have made the ruling that they made to allow these people to die, but those two individuals would have been able to access MAID and die outside of outside of Quebec, because it's about interpretation. There are people who are not terminal that have been accessing MAID in other places. So, but instead of challenging this ruling, which is what the government usually does from lesser courts, they just were like, okay, cool, we're going to rush this. We're going to make this change in 16 months. And what we see is the Dying with Dignity lobby, which has people behind it like Margaret Atwood, a lot of white people with wealth, or Nicole Gladue, who was in the original case, who talks a lot about how she's visited almost every country in the world and she wants to die with a champagne glass in her hand. This bill has been framed and centered around like white people with money or white disabled people with money without really having the parallel conversation of like, okay, how will this bill impact people who experience medical racism already, who are coerced in our medical systems and face violence in our medical systems. So like Joyce Echaquan, who literally died while filming medical professionals in front of her making racist comments. Or it doesn't challenge this idea that people already in COVID have documented online how they are going to access MAID or have applied to access MAID because they can't afford to live. And it doesn't challenge this idea that so many disabled people are living in tents or in deep poverty, and sometimes death is the only option for these people. It centers the voices of people who have privilege and want control over life and death, without actually elevating the voices of people who have no control over their situations and would prefer to die. And so this is what's scary. And that's not even touching the amendments that Senate have put forward, which is opening it up to people with mental illness. So for me, the issue with that is, if you have symptoms of suicidality as part of your mental illness, like BPD and other disabilities that are invisible, you could essentially be provided MAID as a solution or offered MAID as a solution. A couple of senators tried to move an amendment to say, okay, at least let's say you can't offer MAID to somebody without them bringing it up first, and that was voted down. And so I'm really scared about eugenics and what this bill means for the future of disabled people in this country. And it hasn't really been talked about. And the progressive left has been really behind on, catching up to this conversation. And so it's being brought up at Senate again on Tuesday. And what occurred there was a senator I sent you the video, but
Yeah.
it's really cool. She moved an amendment at Senate, which said get rid of track 2 in the bill. Track 2 is the part that says let's open it up to anybody with a disability, even if you're not dying. And she cites the reasons for it and ableism. It's a really good clip if you want to play it.
Yeah, sure thing. I can go and do that right now. So let me just get the screen shared here and open it up, and just let me know if there's any issues with it.
Colleagues, I rise to move an amendment and ask that you give me your attention as I speak to the discriminatory nature of this hasty, ill-considered bill. With great respect for those who have presented the thoughtful and concerned amendments already debated here, and to my honorable colleagues sponsoring this bill, I suggest that we find ourselves giving our best efforts to a bill that really should not be before us today, but it is, because the government refused to conduct the legally mandated review of the current law first and used a lower court's deadline to propel us here today. Prior to the decision not to appeal, more than 70 disability rights organizations, including British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, Council of Canadians with Disabilities, Canadian Association for Community Living, the Disabled Women's Network of Canada, Inclusion Winnipeg, Community Care Manitoba, Arch Disability Law Centre, and People First of Canada, representing the concerns of hundreds of thousands of Canadians living with disabilities, including many who live in racialized poverty, urged the Justice Minister to appeal and made cogent arguments for an appeal that were ignored. Indeed, previous to this bill, the Justice Minister was advised that Canada's current medical assistance in dying regime that is supposed to be undergoing review troubled the UN's former special rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities, who, after her study visit to Canada, reported that she was, quote, extremely concerned about the implementation of the legislation on medical assistance in dying from a disability perspective, end of quote. And this, honorable colleagues, was before the end-of-life criterion was struck down by one lower court and used as a device for bringing this bill rapidly forward. And now, right now, specifically regarding this bill, more independent UN experts are aligning with Canadian disability rights experts.
Okay, so that's the video. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say that's not the full clip, but basically, essentially what she did there, she moved an amendment to get rid of that track that opens it up to anybody with a disability. But the speaker has to come back and let us know whether or not it's going to be ruled out of order, which it probably is going to be ruled out of order because it essentially guts the bill. But what she was referencing there was the mandatory 5-year parliamentary review of medical assistance in dying in Canada, which was due this year. Instead of waiting for it to happen this year, the government rushed this change for medical assistance in dying really quickly, really rapidly. And I question Minister Lamedi's intentions there, because every single Indigenous doctor who testified in front of Senate, every single working class disabled person who testified in front of Senate last week or 2 weeks ago, including myself, mentions the harms and the potential dangers of this bill being put in place, changed rapidly before there are supports in place for people with disabilities. This is coming from the same government who refused to create CERB that would help and support disabled people. Instead, people got a one-time payment of $600 while all the other Canadians got $2,000 a month, right? So there is disparity in how these decisions are being made. And so even if that amendment gets rolled out of order, what we can hope for is that there will be a debate on the floor on the merits of this decision.
Absolutely. So maybe I think this is potentially a point, not a transition, but a point to explore. So with COVID-19, and in terms of people with disabilities, so have people been supported properly throughout this, or has there been really a failure on an institutional level?
There has been a complete failure on an institutional level, and I don't think that's by accident. When the pandemic hit and people with disabilities were asking for support, the government took forever to release that $600 one-time payment. And like I said, all the other Canadians without disabilities who are working receive $2,000 a month. I think we have a problem in this country with an inability to value lives outside of the workforce. And so because disabled people are seen as not being able to contribute to our economy or to our GDP, people are discarded. And you see that with the outcome of like all the deaths from COVID in the long-term care homes. I think like 80% of people who have died from COVID have been in long-term care homes. You'll have Nora Loreto here later on. She can like talk about the data. But yeah, every single one of those people in the long-term care homes are seniors with disabilities or young people with disabilities, right? Because we know that young people with disabilities in Canada are often institutionalized as well. We're seeing instances where some long-term care homes are locking people into their rooms and removing door handles, right? People have been left behind. The Ontario government refuses to increase ODSP to a livable wage. And in fact, 2 days ago announced a complete overhaul of the Ontario Disability Support Program, saying that they're going to move it into an online system, completely removing the human interaction piece of it, meaning more people will fall through the cracks. And we know that some of the most marginalized disabled people on ODSP don't even have access to internet, because if you can't afford food, how are you going to afford internet, right? And so I'm really worried about the direction that the Canadian government on all levels is heading. And it's heading to a place where we're putting on paper, like we're showing that people with disabilities' lives are worth less than everybody else. And it's not a surprise. It's a testament to the capitalist world that we live in, right? Where if you can't work, you're discarded. And it's happened. It's happened as part of our history with like forced sterilization of women and Indigenous women and people with disabilities in Alberta, the Alberta Sterilization Act, the institution of people across this country in a system that was similar to residential schools like the Aurelia Asylum for the Feeble-Minded, where people were literally taken from their homes and sexually, physically, and emotionally abused in institutions that closed up until the early 90s if you were disabled. So this isn't new. We just don't really tie it to our histories in Canada. And so yes, people with disabilities are being left behind.
Yeah, so one of the things that basically that, yeah, again, this is probably something I think in hindsight it was a mistake on my part, was basically not being aware of this until basically until basically it was like some sort of more basically mainstream activist groups in Ontario. I think it was Lead Now had mentioned this, but with ODSP now, there's some issues in terms of clawbacks from CERB. Am I right there?
Yeah, this wasn't made clear when CERB was initially rolled out, but in Ontario, you could have, I forget the exact percentage, but you can have your income rolled back if you were also receiving CERB. And the Ford government has made so many snide comments about we need to get people with disabilities back to work, without really acknowledging that people the most at risk in this pandemic are disabled people who are immunocompromised. So he himself and his administration have a complete disregard of human life when it comes to people with disabilities.
I think there's like a video clip. I think I sent it to you before. It might be worth playing. You good with me doing that? Okay, terrific. I'll put it in here because I think it's maybe kind of alludes to the point a bit more. Okay, here we go. Okay.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi, Premier. Thanks for taking my question.
Thank you.
This might be a bit long-winded, so
That's all
bear
right.
with me, but I want to provide some context.
I get long-winded too.
I spoke with the ODSP Action Coalition this week, and they say taking away their $100 a month pandemic benefit is detrimental to some of them, to people who are already living on a limited income. They say their costs have gone up during the pandemic, having to take Ubers more frequently because they're afraid to use public transit, getting grocery deliveries for those who are immunocompromised. So my question is, why did the province decide to end that benefit in July when it was clearly helping people who are barely making ends meet?
Well, our goal through $17 billion that we're spending is try to support everyone possible. And then there's a certain group that are collecting ODSP that have part-time jobs, and if they keep the CERB going and their part-time job, they're actually up a few $100s, not down. But I understand people are struggling. I get it. I fully understand, and we're doing everything we can to support everyone across the province. And the best way to help people on Ontario Works or ODSP, if they're healthy and they're able to work, get them a job.
So I guess my immediate question would be reaction to that.
Yeah, I remember that when he came out. He doesn't make sense because for people on, and like I spent most of my life on ODSP up until like 5 years ago. Like if you're on ODSP, you don't tend to get a job because they claw it back a certain amount. So it's like it's first of all, it's difficult to get a job if you're a disabled person because of all the discrimination. But then also finding an accessible workspace that can accommodate your different disabilities is difficult. But then when you're on ODSP, like as soon as you start working, they do claw it back. So he's framing it as though people are committing fraud, like working and then taking ODSP, which is not true. And then he's framing it as though people were frauding the system by taking CERB. But honestly, the regulations weren't clear, and ODSP, as it currently stands, is below the poverty line, so people can't eat and make rent. So for the people who did take CERB, when every other Canadian was getting $2,000 a month, and CERB was way lower, I can see why that decision was made. It's not an issue of people committing fraud. It's an issue of people with disabilities being legislated into poverty with rates that are not adequate, that haven't gone up in years. And so he's either dense or he's removed from the situation in terms of not understanding what it means to like live on social assistance in Ontario.
Yeah, and so one of the things is in terms of obviously the ODSP is it's extremely low compared to actual living costs. But what I've heard a fair bit is that it legislates people into poverty. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I did not come up with that term. I think Matthew Green did. I think I just stole it. But
yeah, no, I'll give him credit there. Yeah, so basically, I guess my question would be, how does it actually legislate them into poverty?
Yeah, because it says that, so let's say you're disabled and you can't actually get a job, or your disability keeps you from working. They've set a rate on ODSP that hasn't increased in years, where it's not enough to pay rent and buy food and provide for your basic living. They've also separated the check into like a rent portion and a basic needs portion. So you can't, like depending on how your ODSP is set up, sometimes your worker will send your rent to your landlord. So you have even less of a disposable income to deal with. So then if the government is saying, you know, people with disabilities have a right to be provided an income, but then the income that is being provided is below the poverty line, it's making it legal to force people to live in these poverty wages.
Absolutely, yeah. And so basically, yet again, this is something where I'm very glad you're on here to kind of talk about this. So is it the case where basically if there's a certain income level, basically, wait, actually no. So I guess my question would be more, I've heard basically, yet again, this is what I hear, basically is that it's really hard to actually get into like formal like relationships or basically like marriage there. Is there kind of like restrictions or basically rules within ODSP that essentially make that really difficult?
Yeah, it's strange in the sense that it's not the same as ODS, like OW, although the rules could have changed. But as far as I know, if you get married or if you live with someone, it takes 3 months for their income to count as your income, and then your ODSP gets clawed back. And then it's doubly not enough to live on. So a lot of people with disabilities who are on ODSP are prevented from getting married because they literally won't be able to afford surviving or groceries or basic needs.
So in terms of basically the basically say ODSP compared to the programs that are offered around the country, is the kind of failures of the ODSP basically, is that kind of a standard thing across Canada, or are there certain provinces that maybe have done a slightly better job?
There's not a single like province in Canada that doesn't have a similarly messed up social assistance program for people with disabilities, or in general, even though W has similar issues, Ontario works. And yeah, it's because people with disabilities are not valued in Canada, and that shows through these rates. It's not a surprise, like only 3 provinces even have like provincial accessibility acts to begin with that are not even enforced. And so, yeah, we're really an afterthought in this country.
Yeah, it's terrible, really. Basically, so I think there's 2 testimonies I might want to watch, but I think there's the one you sent me was Dr. Naheed Dosani. Would you be good if we gave that a watch?
Yep.
All right, terrific. Give me a quick second to get this all set up, and then we should be ready to go. Okay, in terms of Naheed, would you be able to maybe give people a little context before we get into this video?
Yes.
About
So
who he is, maybe?
this video is a video of Naheed's testimony at the Senate. So before the debate started at Senate 2 weeks ago around Bill C7, they asked witnesses to come in and to testify. There was only a handful, I think like 3 or less people of color that testified, and then some Indigenous doctors too. Naheed was one of them. He's a palliative care doctor that does a lot of work with the homeless population in Toronto, and also supports with end-of-life care. And so he talked about the dangers of Bill C7 on this population.
All right, sure thing. We'll start the video then, and just let me know if you want to pause it for any reason.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Dr. Naheed Dosani, and I'm a palliative care physician who provides palliative care for people who experience structural vulnerabilities like homelessness, poverty, and systemic racism. I'm the founder of the world's first mobile palliative care program focused on meeting the needs of people experiencing homelessness, the PEACH program, Palliative Education and Care for the Homeless in Toronto, Ontario. Our team, comprising of a group of compassionate health workers, cares for between 110 to 120 people at any given time, whether they live on the street, under a bridge, or in a shelter, through trauma-informed care, harm reduction, and a human rights approach, so that everyone has an opportunity to have equitable access to palliative care. I'm also the founder of Toronto's first hospice for people experiencing homelessness, serve as medical director for the Region of Peel's COVID-19 homeless response.
Mr. Dosani,
Yeah.
Can you just slow down? It's very hard
Sure.
for the interpreters, please.
No problem. And hold faculty appointments in the Division of Palliative Care at both the University of Toronto and McMaster University. Given my understanding that Bill C7 will likely pass in one form or another, today I'm here to convince you of 3 things. 1, that palliative care is not equally accessed by all people across Canada. 2, that people who experience structural vulnerabilities like poverty, homelessness, and racism face even more barriers to accessing palliative care. And 3, that there are circumstances where people choose to pursue MAID because the social conditions around them create the conditions for them to do so. We must do better. Part 1, palliative care is an approach that improves the quality of life of people and their caregivers facing life-limiting illness. In 2016, the Canadian Society of Palliative Care Physicians released a report, How to Improve Palliative Care in Canada. The report highlighted major gaps in palliative care in Canada, but also made 6 significant recommendations to address this. In 2018, Health Canada released the framework on palliative care in Canada, but aside from this, few, if any, of these recommendations have been put into place in any meaningful way, and they need to be. Part 2. What gets talked about even less are the even larger barriers that exist to palliative care access for those who experience marginalization. I've provided street-based palliative care for over 7 years to communities who face these barriers. I've seen this with my own eyes. In 2014, I had the opportunity to join a research team out of the University of Victoria to answer the question, what are the barriers that people in the margins of society experience in accessing palliative care. The study, led by my mentor and colleague, Dr. Kelly Stajdahar, and the report that followed is called Too Little, Too Late, and it tells a damning story. Through 300 hours of observational research, our team followed 25 precariously housed people, their support persons, and service providers. What did we find? That people who live on the margins have difficulty accessing palliative care. Why? Because the need to survive trumps discussions about palliative care when you live on the street. Because death is so common on the street. Because early identification of palliative care needs for people on the streets is challenging. Because our systems operate in silos for housing, food, healthcare, and income, and crosstalk across those silos is rare. Because there are often barriers for home care organizations to provide care in non-traditional home environments. And because there's so much death on the streets that it's created a world of grief and vicarious trauma. In summary, to make palliative care more equitably accessed, we must build up the systems that support people who experience marginalization. Part 3, given that today's testimony is focused on Bill C7 and MAID, let's talk about MAID. I work in the trenches, on the front lines of the homelessness crisis, the opioid overdose death crisis, and now the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. I work in a world where I can successfully arrange for MAID in 2 weeks in an organized and efficient fashion, but also a world where it takes years to get the people I care for into housing, months to get people income supports, and weeks to get the mental health and harm reduction supports if we're lucky. While I appreciate that these processes are not mutually exclusive and do not necessarily come from the same pool of resources, I find this morally distressing. I want to be clear. I've seen people who've pursued MAID because they experienced marginalization. Take Bob, not his real name, of course, a man in his 50s with multiple sclerosis and complex wounds who was referred to our palliative care service for pain management. Despite optimizing his pain and providing good wound care, he pursued MAID. Why? Because his progressive disease and complications of it led to an alcohol use disorder, which led to him losing housing, which led to him losing his family, and ultimately being alone. On the other hand, I've also witnessed how treating the social determinants of health can make a difference such that it can change the course of whether or not someone pursues MAID. Take Mary, not her real name, a woman in her 30s with untreated HIV. She was on the brink of AIDS. She did not want to take her HIV medications because she was on the streets, had a substance use disorder, and no healthcare team. She wanted to die through MAID, but after addressing her emotional and physical pain, helping her with housing, income, and wraparound supports, she changed her mind. She didn't want to die via MAID. She wanted to live because she had a better quality of life. In the discourse on MAID, I did not see the stories of Bob and Mary reflected. I'm told that based on current research, stories like Bob and Mary's are common. But how do we really know? Have we really conducted enough research to know about the experiences of those who live on the margins? Further to this, I worry that Bill C7 will have a disproportionate impact on working class disabled people, people experiencing homelessness, poverty, and marginalization, people who can't afford their basic needs like food and shelter and medication, that without investing in ending the structures that create these situations, MAID may not be a fair choice for everyone. With 35,000 Canadians experiencing homelessness each night, I expect the same energy that's been put into passing MAID into our world and country, that we'll put that same energy into housing, scaling up harm reduction, implementing basic income, and pharmacare. On one hand, if you're making it easier for people to get MAID, you also have an obligation to ensure that people are not forced into vulnerable situations where they feel that they need to access MAID to escape these vulnerable situations. Thank you very much for hearing me out today.
All right, so I think that was some really, really important testimony, and it's definitely great to hear, especially for me hearing this for the first time. So yet again, Sarah, I guess I'd ask basically maybe if there's anything in his testimony that you might want to expand upon for people.
Yeah, I think a lot of the arguments against those of us who are dissenting against this bill have been well, these people are against medical assistance in dying, and the arguments are usually religious. It's not religious, and I think partisanship was getting in the way of like being able to talk about the very real concerns with this bill. So conservatives were gonna vote it or did vote it down, but I found that in engaging with the New Democrats, they kept saying things like, "Well, the conservatives are using the disability community to push forward their religious agenda." Well, I was arguing the opposite of that as well. Like, in a way, by not supporting voting down this bill, New Democrats had been talking about the need to support disabled people the entire pandemic. They were critiquing CERB and all this stuff. But when we brought up, like, hey, MAID is a real concern, it can actually kill people who might not have wanted to die, but are choosing to die because of structural ableism. We were being shut down because they didn't want to agree with conservatives on this one. And I think, yeah, this is a matter of life and death across all party lines. And what we're seeing is more space and time being given to upper middle class white people, like doctors, lawyers, like most of the people who testified, who are also white, on this issue, rather than hearing from working class disabled people who are racialized and indigenous.
Yeah, it's such a horrible thing to hear, and it's not great at all, really. So I think there's some more testimony. I think I sent it to you, and it's from, yeah, it's Disability Justice Network of Ontario. So if there's another piece of testimony that I think I want to place people, so I'll put that on, and then basically I think we can go from there. Maybe after that we can take a look at the. Pardon me?
Before you hit play, can I explain who Gabrielle is?
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you.
Gabrielle is a really great disability activist in BC. Everybody should follow her. I think her handle is in the description. But she was, I think, and I could be wrong, but the only working class disabled person to testify at Senate. And to be fair, like, the process for applying to testify at Senate is completely confusing and arbitrary. And still, we were able to get 20 like racialized working class disabled people to apply, and the only ones accepted were me and Gabrielle against all of these lawyers. So I just wanted to give context. And also, like, as much as I'm talking about Senate, I still think the Senate should be abolished. Okay, you can
Yeah,
play.
no, I think we can definitely agree there for sure. So yeah, let's play the testimony.
To Wales. We will now go on to Gabrielle Peters, who is a co-founder of Dignity Denied. Ms. Peters brings a deep understanding and an analysis of intersections between poverty, ableism, and MAID. Ms. Peters is being assisted today by Spring Hose, also of Dignity Denied. Ms. Peters.
Thank you and good morning, Senators. I'm here to speak on behalf of Gabrielle Peters. I will read her statement. I'm here this morning on the unceded territory of the Silks Nation in the Okanagan area of British Columbia. On behalf of Gabrielle, I'm here today to testify about my knowledge and to share my experiences and maybe answer your questions if you deem me worthy of any. But I hope that you will forgive me if I also pose some questions of my own. Having watched the Parliament and Senate proceedings on Bill C7, and having lived in this country as a disabled poor woman, particularly during this pandemic, I already know how little value is placed on my knowledge or my experiences or even my life. I don't arrive here expecting to say I suffer and have the Canadian state turn and ask, how can we help? Because that is not my lived experience. I did plan to come armed with statistics and analysis and a theoretical framework and some Canadian history and hopefully some humble reasoning skills. I thought I might have time to discuss the conflating of liberty with autonomy and the lethal consequence of policy that denies interdependence and flattens the us that is Canadian society to white, wealthy, and non-disabled. I would have liked to discuss why a lethal injection of chemicals by a doctor has been branded dignified. And perhaps I'd have asked whether you'd given any thought to the manipulative, coercive effect of the branding. Decades of dire warning about how old and disabled people were going to burden our healthcare and society has been matched by marketing MAID as a heroic, brave, self-sacrificing, and honorable death. You'd be shocked at the number of times I've been called selfish for wanting healthcare by healthcare professionals. What is it about this particular demand that makes the Canadian state bend to fully fund and deliver their wishes, regardless of the harmful impacts it will have on a protected class? Is it the prospect of cost savings? Because I know the government commissioned a study and found that there would be some, but it only considered MAID versus end-of-life care. Imagine the cost savings of causing the early death of a disabled person who is not dying and has decades of healthcare and possibly income and other supports ahead of them. If it's not the cost savings, then we are left with ableism versus the rugged individualism Canadian myth, the rugged individualism that is supported by a piece of plastic. The phrase "on their own terms" is slightly foreign to me as a disabled poor person. I can't even cross the street at 8,000 of the 27,000 corners in Canada's third largest city because they haven't been ramped. I live in a unit that was assigned to me. On the day I moved in, the movers had to wait while the police, then the coroner, and then an ambulance used the elevator, because this is how people here move out. My wheelchair seat cushion has a tiny tear in it, and I know this because I deal with incontinence, and when I wiped the cover, I discovered the foam was weighty with the fluid it had absorbed. If I had money, I would go online or pick up the phone and a new cushion would be on its way and I would go on my day. The problem would be handled by me, or actually by my money. Efficient problem solver could be my brand, or at least a line in my resume's cover letter. But I'm poor. So a new cushion means applying for funding. And to do that, I first need to book an appointment with an occupational therapist who will be paid to say what is already obvious, that I need a new cushion, or at least I hope she will. After that, a chain of events that, if it goes smoothly, and it never does, includes documents exchanged between the OT and the ministry and the government vendor until a new seat cushion can finally be ordered to me. This can be weeks or even months of sitting with the smell of stale urine. We do not need to build a laboratory to discover how to end the suffering of poverty. We know how to end poverty, and we just don't do it. Why have press releases about reconciliation? Why have press releases about reconciliation and racism, beside press releases about a Bill C7 that seems to violate the spirit of one and perpetuate the injustice and harm of the other? Were the words spoken here by the Indigenous leaders and by Black disabled people and disabled people of color, few though there were, not sufficient? And if they were, why is a single MAID provider testifying that she is 100% confident about the abilities of 100% of her peers in 100% of the situations to be able to operate 100% free of bias and with 100% accurate assessment, treated as credible evidence? In 2009, before MAID became law, I was admitted to a hospital in Vancouver. Several years earlier, a rare autoimmune disease had set in. Prior to that, I worked, and prior to that, I was a university student who also worked. I had worked my way up from poverty and was on a path to secure middle class. And then I got sick. A day or so into this admission, I found out that my partner was leaving me because he didn't want a future with a disabled woman. Because I no longer was working, and because his income was too high to allow me to receive my own support from the government, when my bank account emptied, I became his dependent. And now he was leaving and I was homeless. It was at this very moment that the hospital sent someone in to console me. They'd heard the news and that they were very sorry. She passed me a tissue and said I had been through so much and I deserved a rest. And then she produced a DNR. When I refused, we went back and forth until the charade of concern was dropped and she shouted, "I don't even understand why you would want to go on
And now
living." He was leaving and I was homeless. I know that MP Garrison has suggested weight not to be put on these words because I didn't report them to a self-governing body. But the thing is, I tried and no one would return my call. I didn't have a computer or visitors and I was bedridden. You think you have all the answers and that you can tie this bill up in a bow. But the truth is, you know nothing of the lives of the people who you are putting in the crosshairs by deluding yourselves that you can amend away the danger. Kill Bill C7, or you will kill disabled people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Peters, and thank you, Ms. Hose, for your very, very compelling message. Thank you.
So for people who don't know, who are tuned in, a DNR is a do not resuscitate. So lots of times if you're disabled and you go in for surgery, doctors and nurses will try to get you to sign one. It basically means if anything goes wrong or if there's a complication, doctors don't have to work to revive you or to revive you if you're dying or to save you.
Wow. Okay, that's so. One of the things that caught my ears really was she mentioned Randall Garrison. So was he like yelling at her or being aggressive towards her? Like,
What I gathered from this is that he has made comments about her not being believable. I don't know exactly what happened there, but I do know that Randall Garrison, who I don't even know why he's allowed to run again because he's very problematic, but he's running again apparently for the NDP. He has been one of the loudest voices in support of medical assistance in dying. And he's the one that pushed this through as the justice critic for the NDP without listening to disabled people this entire time. I don't know why it wasn't under the portfolio of the NDP's accessibility critic, because Blakey is the person that talks to all the disabled people. Instead, it went through the justice critic because they treated it like a justice issue or a law issue because of the Quebec court ruling, instead of looking at it from a human rights lens. So it should have been on Blakey's file, but it's on Garrison's file. And I don't know if you know a lot about Garrison, but he's very problematic and anti-Palestine and a whole bunch of other issues tied up in all of that. So he hasn't really been listening to the disabled community at all.
Wow. So I already knew about how problematic Garrison was on a foreign policy front. I mean, like, for example, the article I did on him basically supporting the IHRA definition and basically trying to, and joining a committee to push social media to enable that, which would arguably, in my view, actually result in the censure of multiple of his fellow MPs in the same party, basically, along with all the activists, basically, and Palestinians who want to resist apartheid there. So that alone is disgraceful and grounds for, quite frankly, not having a place within a political party. But to top that off, like with his views on MAID and his actions there, that's horrible. That is absolutely horrible. And like, you have two. Sorry. Go ahead. Do I have room to go ahead or?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. I was gonna say basically both issues on their own are bad enough that they should just have no place in the party. But to have both is, that's bad. That is really bad. And so obviously he recently got approved to run again. I assume not exactly pleased about that.
Yeah, no, I don't think he should be an elected official. He's problematic. He doesn't listen to people, and his views are harmful, quite frankly, to the future of the party. I don't know why he's been allowed to run again. I'm very confused. I didn't think that was going to happen. Garrison also pushed for the vote to be whipped. So like without even really having robust conversations with disabled people, the NDP almost unanimously voted it down. Voted it up, like Bill C7, for it to be sent to Senate. And this goes against everything they've ever said around wanting to support disabled people and like getting mad at the Liberals for not supporting CERB. Building out a CERB that is equitable. And I think the only person who didn't vote this up was MP Green, who like missed the vote, like he abstained, or he wasn't present at the time of the vote count. But yeah, Garrison has been one of the biggest, if not the biggest, roadblock on like getting the NDP to shift gears on this problematic bill. And I definitely don't think he should be running again.
Yeah, so I guess the question would be, and I'm curious with your thoughts on this, like especially with Garrison's, the actions of him basically, do you think the NDP is still like the party to kind of take the left forward there?
I don't know. This process has been like super disillusioning for me because we're talking about actual eugenics, and the NDP didn't do their research to learn about the history of eugenics in Canada and how this would perpetuate that. We need more politicians to not just take on hot issues or hot topics that are gathering a lot of attention and actually do their research and do the work to recognize issues as quick as they can. And I know like it's not perfect and the state itself is problematic. Like working in this apparatus of governance is problematic in and of itself. But like, yeah, if the NDP actually wants to like resonate with grassroots, with organizers, with racialized people, the first step is to like see a problematic bill and then listen to people or find people in your communities who would have a say on that. It seems like they're speaking up more on Palestine, which is good, and issues like that, but it can't just be hot button issues. Like they need to actually apply their principles to as many things as they can, and MAID would have been one of those things. And so yeah, my answer to that is right now in this moment as I'm doing this interview, I'm pretty disillusioned with party politics because of this process. Because we had to kill ourselves to get this to be over the last few weeks, to get this to be an issue that was recognizable, to get MPs to understand why this is problematic, only to learn that it can't be voted down again after Tuesday. Senate will only vote on the amendments and the NDP can't vote it down again. So even if we switch some lines, they can't vote it down again because they already voted it up in December. So essentially this is going to pass. We have to get involved in the charter case and then push against the government again, or try to get them to move another bill to repeal this one. Like the process is messed up. They should have listened to people in advance and they didn't do that. They didn't put that work in. And so I'm sitting here super disillusioned and I feel like I'm playing the role of a social justice lobbyist. So it's like, I see an issue, then I'm like, hey, hi guys, like, hey, can you please listen about this issue? And they're like, well, I don't know. Like, then I have to do all this work to convince them. I wish it would be a situation where like you can work your ass off to get people elected, and like they actually take time to listen to you and listen to what people in the grassroots communities that they have no experience with in terms of like, especially disability and other issues, like that they would like take time to do outreach and to listen, but then they do these stupid town halls and waste people's time where they're doing all the talking and not really listening to people or implementing that into policy. And so I think their heart's in the right place, but they do too much listening to who they perceive to have power versus listening to their base. There's no way the NDP should have been listening to the Dying with Dignity lobby, which isn't predominantly disabled. It's people who want the right to die. They're essentially a lobby group supported by people like Margaret Atwood, versus like actual disabled community in the grassroots. Their priorities are mixed up. So that's my convoluted answer to your question. I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, like it's obviously it's okay. It's definitely, I can understand why you're in a kind of crossroads position. There's a lot to think about. And so absolutely understand that there. So I think there's a petition basically you linked me. I think I'll put it up to the screen now. Maybe if you want to talk a bit about that, feel free to do that.
So Gabrielle Peters and Spring Hawks, who you just heard testify, created Dignity Denied to sort of counter the narratives out there around medical assistance in dying and to get people to sign this petition. A ton of people have signed it already. If people are interested in learning more, you can sign up on this website in support of the campaign to say no to C7. We're also working with Surge Toronto on the 16th to do a phone bank or a phones app calling all of the MPs and trying to get them to change their mind on this. At this point, like I said, it's not really possible to vote this down, but we're trying to get them to change their mind so that when we come back asking for a repeal of this, that they can have voted in. So yeah, sign the petition, please. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So here's the actual basically link page. Definitely go to the website for sure to go support their action. So I guess one of my questions, right, is from what you're saying, I get the sense basically it hasn't fully gone through the Senate, right? So basically, when would this be coming up in the Senate next?
So the next time they're debating this is Tuesday at 2 p.m. You can watch it on Parliative, and they're going to be debating the amendment that we heard come up by Senator McPherson, not too like at the beginning of this interview, where she was trying to get rid of the harmful part of this that opens it up to anyone with a disability who's not dying. They're going to debate that. It might get ruled out of order, and then they're going to debate whether or not they want to pass the bill in its entirety. Once it gets passed, it's going to be sent to Parliament the next week, and you're going to see debates on the amendments in the House of Commons by MPs. And what they're going to be debating at that point is not the bill itself, but the amendments that Senate made. So one of the things I'm hoping that our MPs vote down is this amendment to open it up to everybody with a mental illness, because I think a lot of socioeconomic and social determinants of health factor into people with mental illnesses wanting to die, and also like lack of supports, medicine being free, and therapy. It just doesn't make sense to offer this first before anything else.
Yeah.
Voted down. Sorry. So people just have to tune in and see.
Okay, that's totally fair. That might be something actually worth with basically live streaming, watching through potentially. So I will definitely add that to the list of things I might go ahead and do. Yeah, so I don't know if I have any other questions, but I guess obviously you mentioned the petition. Is there any other actions that people might be able to take if they want to like try to push for like actually supporting disability justice?
Please call your senators, please call your MPs, and try to get them to change their mind on this bill. Talk about eugenics, educate them on why this is problematic. You can go on MAID now. They created a phone bank and script template for us, maidnow.ca/stop bill C7, and you should be able to support in that way. Thank you so much.
All right, sure. So where can people keep an eye on the activism and work that you've been that you do and have been continuing to do?
You can check out the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, which is at www.djno.ca, and then our handles are DJN Ontario on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And then my personal handle is Sarah, my first and last name with an underscore, Sarah Jama _.
All righty, Sarah, I can't thank you enough for coming on, and I really appreciate you educating us and giving us some knowledge on such an important issue. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Aiden. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. All right. Have a good one. Okay. Oh, I'm gonna bring in Nora. So if you want, yeah, sorry. If I wasn't clear, if you want to stick around, you can stick around. But if you need to do anything else, basically, I'm gonna be bringing in Nora Loreto now.
Okay, I'm probably gonna go, but tell her I said hello.
All right. So we'll do. Bye. All right. Catch you. All right. So we're just having Nora just connect to the audio pretty much as we speak right now. So just stick around for that in a quick second. All right, Nora, thank you so much for coming on. We are joined right now by Nora Loreto. Very happy to have her on. So, Nora, before we get started, can you tell people a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm 36. I live in Quebec City. I have been doing left-wing stuff for pretty much my whole life, but I really cut my teeth in the student movement. So that's where I come from. I was active at Ryerson for probably too many years, and then involved in the Canadian Federation of Students Ontario. And I've been living in Quebec now for 8 years. And here, the kind of work that I do is I was involved with building an eco-socialist organization in 2013, which was interesting and kind of fell apart. Although like, I mean, I've not really talked about it or written too much about it, but it was a really interesting experiment. And I'm involved with Quebec Solidaire a little bit. I was much more involved before, but I've kind of let that involvement fall to the side because I just don't have much time. And mostly what I'm working on right now is solidarity with Muslim communities in Quebec City and fighting Islamophobia and racism. So yeah, I got some education too. I mean, it's not that interesting. So if anyone has questions about that, like.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously you've done and continue to do a lot of terrific work, but the reason that caught my eye and I particularly want to bring on to discuss, and I'll share the screen right now, was this piece you did for Passage. So what was the impetus for you to start working on this piece?
Yeah, I was following along Bill C-7, like not that closely. I knew about the constitutional challenge to the original medical assistance in dying legislation, which was found unconstitutional by Quebec Superior Court judges. And it was kind of like encouraged by some activists that I'm in touch with. Specifically, I want to shout out Sarah Jama, who was the first person to really say, you have to pay attention to this. If you can write about it, that'd be great. And then through doing that, kind of looking more at Bill C-7, I became in more contact with someone named Gabrielle Peters, who is a writer and activist out on the West Coast, and who's been really central to help explain from the perspective of someone that lives with a disability and that needs a lot of support to have a dignified life, just how impossible that really is under the current circumstances. And she has an anti-capitalist perspective. She's really great. I quote her testimony to the Senate committee in this piece. And it's so funny because right now I'm working on a book, and so my time to write stuff is so limited that's not related to the book. And I was supposed to do this piece on the Roberta Place outbreak in Barrie, Ontario, where now 70 people have died in long-term care. And the issues between Bill C-7 and MAID and how Canada has treated people in residential care, they're very connected. And so in talking with Naheed at Passage, I kind of made a last minute decision. He was expecting a piece on Roberta Place, and I was just like, okay, I hope you like this instead. So it was kind of a last minute decision, but I'm really, really glad that I was able to do that. And so it came out last week.
All right, so for sure. Now, I was obviously fortunate enough to actually just finish talking up with Sarah Jama, and we actually listened through to some of the testimony there. So you mentioned in terms of basically now you've done a lot of work with tracking with COVID cases, actually, is one of the things I basically have been noticing for a while. What was the original motivation for that?
Yeah, it was just kind of selfish on one hand, and I guess altruistic on the other. The selfish side was that as a writer, I mean, I'm always looking for really fast stats, like any writer is. And when Sandy and I recorded an episode on deaths by police, deaths in long-term care, which I think was April 12th, April 11th, we talked about the deaths that were already happening in long-term care. And we knew that, we record on Sundays. That's why I can only stay around till 8:30 because I'm going to be recording tonight with Sandy. We knew that from Sunday till Tuesday when the episode came out, it was already going to be too late. And so that brings me to the altruistic reason why I did it, was to make sure that we had in one place this information. And I was specifically looking at it from the perspective as an Anglophone living in Quebec City, knowing that La Presse and the Montreal Gazette, which is an English newspaper, but often doesn't get too much attention outside of Quebec, they are the ones tracking these deaths because, of course, they are happening fastest and most furious in Quebec and in British Columbia, right? British Columbia was, of course, the first site of these massive outbreaks. And I couldn't believe that it wasn't being done. And so I started immediately. I knew I had to do it nightly because this information is not posted cumulatively anywhere. And so if I miss a night, I actually miss a night of data. Like, it's really hard to recover if I miss a night. So I haven't. I've been doing it every night since. And so the first day that I did this, I believe I had 170 deaths, to give you an idea of how far advanced we already were. But of course, 170 deaths, you can see on the screen right here, we're already at 15,119. It's just unbelievable. And so that little spreadsheet, that's I stare at that. I mean, once I finish recording with Sandy tonight, I'll do that again tonight, stare at that spreadsheet and add to it. And, you know, in the screen here, you've got the top 10 deaths. Well, top 9 deaths, because you can see I've got a placeholder for Alberta because they give us the total, but they don't give us the breakdowns all that well. And you can just see these numbers are so staggering. And like the cells, cell 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 10, 13, 15, those are all from the first wave. So the first wave hit hard and fast in Quebec residences. Then you can see Tender Care Living Center, which is cell 11. That was a second wave outbreak. 81 people died at Tender Care in Scarborough. That happened only at the end of January was when they hit that 81. The Centre Hébergement de l'Hôtel Dieu de Saint-Hyacinthe was a really big outbreak and a long outbreak throughout the whole course of the second wave. That also went from pretty much very few. I think they had 20 deaths in the first wave and all the way up to 80. And then Hôpital Saint-Jérôme, which is really interesting, that's cell 14. 76 deaths are attributed to that hospital. And the hospital, they had COVID outbreaks that were just uncontained. And that's how many people died from hospital acquired COVID transmission.
All right, for sure. And so one of the things is with long-term care and how COVID has really racked those institutions. One of the interesting things to see from the NDP recently was a push to make all of these institutions become non-profits. Now, do you think that's a far enough step, or do you think maybe it should be more of a nationalization? Should maybe be the priority?
Look, like where you're hovering over right here tells you the answer to that question. All of the top, like you can see, all of the top 14 are public with the exception of one facility, right? Actually, 2. So you can see that there's that private, but even that private Centre d'Hébergement Champlain Marie Victorin in Quebec, I got to change that. It should be probably a subsidized private, which is in Quebec how they do it. So does the NDP's motion go enough? Far enough? I would have liked to have seen them say they would open the Canada Health Act rather than saying they won't open the Canada Health Act, but they'll put long-term care into a set of standards similar to the Canada Health Act. I think that's a little bit weaselly. I know politically why they're doing that because they want to sidestep trying to have this conversation about opening the Canada Health Act. But I think it's very clear that the fundamental problem within long-term care is that it's so clearly para-private or para-public that it absolutely needs to be closer to the mainstream healthcare delivery within this country, and the way that it's not has allowed the for-profit operators to just wreak so much havoc. And it's a logic, right? It isn't just that so many of these operators are totally shitty and disgusting and horrible, but they bring down the standards for everyone else. So yes, obviously get rid of profit. That's a freaking no-brainer, but you have to go way beyond that. And average Canadians need to understand that, like, when you have a system that's based on 2 hours of care per day, 2 hours and 30 minutes of care per day, like, it's obviously going to create what you see here. And the myriad stories, horror stories that we're hearing throughout this pandemic, they're not just related to profit or not for profit. There's some much more fundamental problems within the delivery of this care. Like, and one thing to just mention, I mean, Rivera, which is the one that the NDP said, we can make this not-for-profit because it's owned by the Canada Pension Fund and its board of directors are appointed through orders in council. That one doesn't cross over the provincial federal divide, so we can go make profit disappear in this. Well, they're a massive international corporation, and Australian researchers have just found out that Rivera has a very complicated tax shelter structure that allows them to hide their profits within the UK so that they don't have to pay as much tax. And the reason why the Australian research team decided to do that was because they couldn't get the data necessary of Rivera's information in Canada and the United States. It's only UK where they actually had that information. So, and then there's a great picture of a triangle train.
Yeah, sure. I was just trying to find that basically you're saying Rivera, right? I'll just search it up here.
It's Rivera. There's that's not it. That's an interesting report that people should read too. I would search Rivera, um, Rivera, Australia, Huffington Post, because that was the only Canadian publication that I saw covering it.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Okay, thanks. So yeah, it's certainly
So like, you know, the NDP can say, you know, there's exactly Jagmeet talking about getting rid of the profit motive in the federal system. You can say that you'll get rid of the profit motive out of Rivera, but the reality is that Rivera is not a hospital or ambulatory corporation. They are a real estate holding corporation that is like, that has to give profits to its shareholders. So just getting rid of profit, I mean, yeah, obviously, but it goes much deeper than that. And I also want to just point out that their elder in chief is a woman by the name of Hazel McCallion, who some folks will, I'm sure, know as being the kind of the mother, godmother, grandmother of Mississauga, and of the incredible urban sprawl and horrible urban planning and tons of corruption within Mississauga, because she'd been mayor for so long, and today's her 100th birthday.
all right. Thank you so much for the details there. So I guess basically one of my questions would be on a bit of a more of a different note now. So let's talk about, I guess, Passage. How did you get connected with Passage? Because you've written a fair bit of interesting pieces. I think there was one of the Poppy Warriors, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how you got it connected and involved there.
Yeah, so I had been a columnist. I had been a columnist with the National Observer for going on 3 years. And they pretty much had to kind of say, we can't pay you at the start of the pandemic. And so, you know, good luck. And at the exact same time, Passage was about to launch. Passage had already launched. I'd already written a couple of columns for them. And David asked if I'd be formally a columnist for them. And so I said, sure. And so that has meant every 2 to 3 weeks, they try to get me to get something out. And it's really cool because, you know, the Passage is providing this location for, like a lot of places, I know you folks do this as well, but a really good kind of central location of real left-wing analysis, which is nice, especially since a lot of the left-wing internet news agencies from the 1990s have kind of disappeared, right? I mean, Rabel's really the only one from a world of Znet to Straight Goods, to there's a whole bunch of Canadian left-wing indie media, all the indie media websites that just don't exist anymore, or that kind of were taken over by other ones. And Rabel has its problems in a major way, and Passage pays, which is really, really great. They don't pay much, but they pay. And so it's been really nice to see this project go as far as it's gone, and attract a lot of really great writers as well, a lot of really great topics.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like I have a ton of respect for basically the work that Davide and them have done over Passage. Obviously, I'd have to give a special thanks to Jeff Sharp, who's kind of been someone who's been a good kind of talking point for someone where I've been trying to figure out some of the aspects of marketing and some of these things, which admittedly, I did not come into this expecting to think about marketing.
Yeah.
And I have exactly come into the past few weeks. I kind of came to a realization that things needed to change, potentially not drastically, but things did need to change. And so him and like Ethan Cox were like the first 2 people I reached out to. So I can't thank him enough. So obviously, just in case people don't know, basically with the Canada Files, we're actually going to be switching away from the daily news grind to more investigatory and just deeper news analysis content. I just think there's 2 core aspects of it, which is firstly, I think there's just another level that can be reached. The gray zone is kind of the thing I've always kind of wanted to emulate and kind of model in Canada, basically, but also in terms of the Canada Files, I've basically been there's been a lot of contributors, there's been a lot of podcast supporters, and so there's been a lot of people who've been terrifically fortunate to work with, but I don't actually have a core team. Mm-hmm. And so to make things just more manageable for myself, also, not only does this get to improve content, but it makes life a little easier for myself as well. That enables these kind of Twitch streams and enables some of these things. Basically, like this coverage isn't gonna go away entirely. It just means we can tweet about it, or we can post about it, or we can do YouTube videos about it. So basically, yeah, like I said before, I can't give enough of a shout out to them. Basically, they've been one of the few basically outlets really that or at least people within those outlets that have been kind of interested in engaging. Like a lot of the engagements I've done and the people I've been able to connect with have actually been international.
Right.
More so, I've found more of a like open arms for those kind of collaborations, like Mango Press. I mean, funny, like one of the funniest things, one of the first interviews or requests I got was actually from Press TV, which was a rather an interesting surprise for me. So definitely with the kind of lack of so much more connection or engagement within Canadian left media, like the people who do engage in chat I'm even more grateful for their connections there. But getting back to your work now, one of the interesting things I've seen basically is that you've mentioned that the CBC and some of these outlets have not really credited you with the work. What's your experience been there?
Yeah, actually, it's so funny. This morning was the first time I did CBC national TV in 4 years. With the exception of one interview that I did around the Humboldt stuff, which was like the interview was fine, but they ended up cutting it to like 3 minutes. So it's one of those things that's hard to like consider kind of a serious interview. But anyway, yeah, the work that I've done with a spreadsheet, if I was anybody else in this country, like I would be doing the media circuit all the time. I would be talking about it all the time. There's, you can see activists, doctors, epidemiologists, academics who are active on the questions of long-term care, on the questions of COVID and care in general, getting like attention for their daily reports and their daily updating. And somehow for me, it's just like, oh no, we'll just take your data. So like the first time that it happened was, there was an interview with someone at CBC who's well known, and he cited something from the Toronto Star, and it was like, this is how many people have died in long-term care, and the number was the same as my number, which was pretty much impossible because there's things I was missing on that list, right? So it's just like, okay. And then after that, the Toronto Star did its own tracking, and then they had 2 journalists who were really following that quite closely, and they came up with their own numbers. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, like, I don't expect to be credited because that's just how it works, unfortunately. And what's most important for me is when I get these back channel messages from journalists saying, I've relied so much on your work and thank you. That's awesome. I don't need to get credit beyond that. It would just be less shitty if they also didn't blacklist me at the same time.
Yeah, I'm for sure. So now I believe there was actually you recently released a book, right? Could you maybe tell people a little bit about that?
I'd love to, yeah. So I wrote a book about feminism in Canada and what needs to happen to restore power to the feminist movement. And so the book is a critique of white feminism. It's a critique of how we tell feminist history in this country. And it's I really wrote it for new feminists, whether they're new because they're young or they're new because they've just come to feminism later in age. Although I've heard from a lot of activists that they've really enjoyed the book too. But to just construct this explanation for people that have never really thought about how power is built through social movement organizing, to give a roadmap for why we actually do need physical spaces to have debate. Why are our debates online so bizarre, and why are they so easily manipulatable from the right or from the center? And why has white feminism been such a difficult thing to dislodge from feminism in general? Because of course they're hand in hand. Like the history of radical Black feminism, radical queer feminism, and Indigenous feminism. Like there's long histories that are really, really important, but the mainstream feminist movement has almost always been hostile to those kinds of other feminisms. And so I wanted to really explain what that hostility looked like, and give some of my thoughts and kind of highlight some of the thinking that I think is useful or helpful or whatever for people who might be new to this and just not really understand what that kind of charge means. What do we really mean when we say that this is white feminism? So people can pick that up anywhere. It's the book is available, and yeah, and it's like really hard to write a polemic. So there's some advice for any young writers out there: is don't start with a polemic. Well, it's my second book, but it was a real pain. It was really hard to write.
All right, so I just linked your book in the Twitch chat. I would definitely absolutely suggest that that people go about and go pick that up if they can. Yeah, so yet again, I think I have to give you a bit of a special thanks, because I was actually listening to your podcast episode on you and Sandy Hudson, your experiences in the student organizing in terms of student unions and that front. And so like I can't say anything about it publicly till the 17th.
Okay.
But I'll let you know a little bit about it in the private messages. But there's something fairly exciting coming up that I'll be getting involved with Ryerson, and I definitely will say that along with some other people that I've been talking with. Your kind of episode did actually give me a bit of an impetus to seriously actually make efforts to get into that. So
you know what? So we had a surprise. My partner and I know each other from the student movement. He was the chairperson of the Canadian Federation of Students, and I was a student activist at Ryerson. And a friend of ours kind of showed up in Quebec City just because he needed to escape Ottawa. And so his friends drove up in a socially isolated way, and they went to an Airbnb by themselves. But we met in a park, and we were able to walk around for many hours, reminiscing about the student movement, and then talking about what the student movement is today. And he got my partner involved. The two of them organized a bus from Western to the Summit of the Americas protest in 2001. And the big joke at the time, of course, is like, it's impossible that Western would be sending a bus, but they were able to send two. They got the grad student union to pay for that. And we were talking about how, the power of the student movement, it's really hard to see right now because there's just like remnants of what it had been, but everything ebbs and flows, and building something that had been there in the past is not impossible. And so I think that I'm really actually quite excited to see this next phase of student activism, because I was involved with a wave of student activism that was very strong. We were kind of like on a surge, and then I watched it drop off, and I know it's inevitable that it'll happen again. So I'm really excited to see what happens with you and anyone else listening or watching on the Twitch stream. Like, do it, because at the very least you'll get access to a budget and an office, and you'll be able to get in the face of your admin.
yeah, let's just say and I don't want to get sued, because let's just say this person, who I feel like you probably are aware of, has ran around threatening to sue anyone who calls him out for his actions. And so let's just say this certain person his actions may have also put a role of jolting me into basically the point of F this guy, I am not standing for this. So nice. Hopefully I can maybe play a role in, let's say, helping to resist his attempts to just rampage across this entire school, basically. And just, let's just say I'm not thrilled about it. And once that role is announced, I will be talking about that a little bit more. Cool. So yeah.
And don't lawsuits. Lawsuits are just like threats, man. Like I've been.
Oh no. I'm. Don't worry. Yet again, this is something like I can't say, but I have already had a certain pro-Israeli apartheid group threaten me and a few others with a lawsuit already. So I've already had that thrown in my face before. So look, I'm not going to basically not talk about that. It's more just once I'm in that position, I will. And let's just say this. Fuck that guy. Let's just put it this way. Name will be said in a few days, but I think I'll trust that people are able to know who I'm talking about, because let's just say this, and it's the Ontario Human Rights Council, I believe it is. Yeah, people can search it up. People can search it up from there, and they can go from there. But anyways, Nora, now
fuck that guy.
Yeah. So now where can people check out your work and keep up with the work that you're doing?
Yeah. And I don't know what your time's looking like. Like, I mean, I haven't heard from Sandy, so I'm good until basically my phone rings. So.
Oh, okay. Is there anything else you want to talk about, or basically?
I don't know. I mean, is there any comments in the stream? Anyone saying anything they want to hang out?
Actually, you know what? Funny. Thank you for actually asking me to keep another check.
And actually,
Um,
and as I said this, Sandy just messaged me, and she's like, she needs 20 minutes. So there you go.
Okay, well, sure thing. So, quick question. Okay, quick question from Yuri. He's asking, did and he puts in the quotes, mainstream white feminist movement play a part in the bigoted religious symbols ban in Quebec in public sector jobs? So that's Bill
Oh, yeah.
21.
Yeah, that's such a great question. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly a really good example of that. And you know, Quebec, it really is important to foreground the conversation about Quebec with recognizing the fact that that there's generations of people like as young as 45 who remember being in abusive situations with like religious order women dressed in full habit, like being abusive. Okay, so there's this generalized experience in this province of like trauma from religious schools, which does not excuse Bill 21, but it is important to understand why it had so much kind of currency. So I actually write about this in the book, and I write about this in a chapter on debate on how the Fédération des Femmes du Québec was like really embroiled in this debate. And so in the 1990s, there was a girl went to school wearing a hijab, and the school kicked her out. And it went to the Status of Women Quebec and some human rights body, and they were the ones to say that there needs to be a religious accommodation. There's nothing wrong with a child going to school wearing hijab. But the Women's Federation, this white mainstream feminist group, was like, that is oppression. We're not cool with this. But because the Status of Women of the government body was like, this is reasonable accommodations necessary, the FFQ was able to just kind of like sit back, even though the tendency within the FFQ was very, very suspicious of Islam, really. And so that was mid 90s. So then fast forward into the 2000s, and the religious accommodations thing is just so Islamophobic and all over the Quebec press. And the Women's Federation never really was able to have an internal debate to question their own position on this until they were forced to, because of something called the Bouchard-Taylor Commission. And the Bouchard-Taylor Commission tried to understand, quote unquote, reasonable accommodations of a secular society for people who practice religion. And they made a whole bunch of really great recommendations. Like really, they identified that racism was rampant within the press. And if you are really interested in this, like you can take a read. But where they really fucked up was that they came up with this compromise. That's how they call it. And it kind of was a compromise if you look at this with like two kind of black and white kind of sides. And their compromise was that people who work in positions of coercive authority should not wear any demonstrable religious symbol. And they just define coercive authority as being judges, cops, and lawyer, like agents of the crown, so crown prosecutors. So it's pretty narrow. And the reason why it's a compromise is because there's a lot of people in Quebec society being like, it should be just totally banned outright. And Bouchard-Taylor only picked those a couple of professions. So then the FFQ was forced to take a position, and racialized feminists who had been always critical of how the FFQ was approaching this, but was also a little bit complicated because there was like kind of this weird version of solidarity with women from like a quote unquote who are in nations that where women were forced to wear religious symbols, being in Quebec because of a really strong tie to like, you know, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, like French speaking Arab nations. That they might come to Canada and say, I was forced to wear hijab back home and now I'm in Quebec and now I'm free. And so there's a really confused kind of role that not really understanding kind of like situating that in Canada should have had. So then they've commissioned, they have studies, they do a provincial roundtable, a tour at colleges and at women's shelters and all this stuff to try and understand how to navigate this. And they come up with this report called Tolerance /Intolerance. And they come up with this position that no woman should be coerced to wear certain things, period, which was like, I mean, not ideal for how they framed it, but it was better than Bouchard-Taylor. But then they also condemned nations that were oppressing women through religious wearing, right? Which is, again, a vestige of that white feminism bullshit. So fast forward to 2017 and the debate continues to rage, but not so much within the FFQ. And Charles Taylor, seeing what happened, like I'm pointing down here at the mosque in Saint Foy, announces that he was wrong, that was a complete mistake for them to have had those positions as part of Bouchard Taylor. And it throws the left, who had never really engaged in this question because it was too touchy and because it was so dominated by whiteness, it throws the left into a position where they automatically have to reconsider the fact that Bouchard Taylor had been their default for a decade. And so then what happens? There's this incredible Congress of the CSN, the union, where out of nowhere, out of kind of a confused kind of debate from how I understand from friends who were there, they were just like, they broke with Bouchard Taylor, and they were like, we completely oppose religious symbols ban in all jobs, which was like night and day from where the CSN would have been 15 years ago. Quebec Solidaire, we had a huge battle. That was the last thing I was really involved with in Quebec Solidaire. Huge battle over what the position would be within that party. And then at the end, the vote was like 97% in favor of no, like ditching Bouchard Taylor, no restriction, this is racist. So that was really great. And then the FFQ made the same decision as well at their council, and this is 2019. And of course it helped that the right-wing CAC was the one that put this onto their shoulders and made this their issue. But it was very interesting because the debates that had to happen for people to come up to this position in Quebec Solidaire were real debates. Like I sat through probably 7 or 8 general assemblies where people really debated this because they just couldn't get their head around why anyone would be so religious, right? It's just this like xenophobic, chauvinistic, white, Western kind of approach. But it did require debate. And I saw a lot of people change their minds, which I was very impressed by. And so, you know, now the fight, of course, continues because we have Bill 21 on the books. It made even more ridiculous considering now everybody's faces are covered within our public institutions. And it's important to note that the CAC, they only did this because they knew that it was going to be popular among their racist base. And so they expanded Bouchard Taylor to include teachers, which had never been part of what they had said in 2008. So I hope that answers the question, but that's a really interesting struggle.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess one of the things, I guess there's two questions. There's a question from two questions from Yuri, and so I'll ask one question which I think will lead into it. So let's talk about the CAQ. So how did they actually like get into power? I guess would be one of my questions, because one of the interesting things is engaging with some of the foreign policy, the anti-war movement. I've seen it be some of the most active that front being in Quebec. It seems to be like kind of almost like a bastion of kind of Canadian anti-war movement. So seeing like a political party like that and political figures like that, and you see like Quebec Solidaire even struggling in polling, like how does that happen?
Yeah, it's actually really simple. So the CAC is a new party, and this is the first time they've ever formed government. And so it was the last election in 2018 was a rejection of the old parties and an adoption of the new parties. And so the CAC came out of this fusion of right-wing forces between federalists and sovereigntists. So Francois Legault had been a Péquiste. He's got liberals among his ranks. I mean, our Minister of Long-Term Care was the Minister of Long-Term Care in the Liberal government. And so they just had this like group of people come together to be able to, from a populist perspective, reject the Liberals and the PQ, because both parties they are rotten and they're seen as being rotten. And at the same time, QS had the same surge. I mean, it wasn't at all as popular. The CAC had something like 75 MPs elected and QS only had 10. But the fact that QS got off the island of Montreal was really historic and really important. And there's a huge age divide in this. Like the CAC does not win among people under 40, QS does. And the CAC, like, as much as they're a right-wing party, we have to remember that they did not run on the racism stuff. Like they dog whistled it a couple of times, but their main policy, they had a couple of main policies. One was full-day daycare. I mean, full-day kindergarten, which is ridiculous because we have a daycare system. But that's not a right-wing thing, right? Like Legault was like, I will resign as premier if we don't get full-day kindergarten. And people were like, why do you care about this so much? But okay. Second major thing was reforming long-term care. And so like you can imagine like someone who's disaffected by politics and isn't paying attention and who's over the age of 40, they'd be like, yeah, whatever, fuck, like I'll vote for the CAC. I knew a lot of people here who are not white who are prepared to vote for the CAC. And then of course what happens the second that they got elected, then all hell breaks loose and they just unleashed this incredible campaign against a whole bunch of minorities. So it was against obviously people who are religious, against taxi drivers, really vicious anti-taxi driver campaigns, all these weird attacks on the Anglophone community, which is kind of like, who the fuck cares about Anglophones? Why are you doing that? And there was a couple of others too. And so it's, it's very, it's not that surprising that they're as popular, because they really, if something that they promise doesn't poll well, they have no problem pivoting away from it. They're not ideologues in the same way that like a Doug Ford or a Scott Moe or a Jason Kenney is an ideologue. And a really good example of this is on pipelines. Like, there's no way that Francois Legault would not fucking bone a pipeline if he didn't have a chance, but if he had the chance. But it's so unpopular in this province that the guys come out as being like the anti-pipeline premier.
All right, for sure. And so I guess that leads in fairly well to the question right now. So shifting back to the fight against Bill C-21, what's the latest in fighting that ban, whether it's legal or activism?
Yeah, so there's several court cases in the works. I think there's 3, it might be 4. There was one that started in November, and then within 2 days, I think a lawyer or 2 lawyers got COVID, and so all the brakes were put back on, unfortunately. And since then, I haven't heard that's been ramping up. So we were in the streets against Bill 21 in mid-November, just as news came that there was a COVID case, then everything was going to stop. And so it's on the books. It's the law. Anybody who already was employed and wore a religious symbol was not supposed to lose their job. So you'll still see, women who wear hijab in a school. But of course, it's like hostile and racist and difficult because a lot of people decided to leave. A lot of teacher students. It was the teacher students that would not be able to wear hijab if they went into the classroom after that. So there's quite a few teacher students, and of course, and other religious symbols too. So there's quite a few teacher students that left. But in terms of the activism, it's not off of people's radar at all. The coalition here is run by Muslim women, which is not the case for a lot of other, like a lot of campaigns against Islamophobia that touch Islamophobia. So that's a really positive aspect of this campaign. And so they like kind of jump into action whenever there's a flashpoint and organize a march or a rally somewhere. So that's really great. But the real center of organizing, I'd say, is Montreal. And in Montreal, they've had quite a few demonstrations to continue to put pressure. And then I think, in Quebec City, what we're planning to do, so I'm part of a group that brings together tons of organizations that do anti-racism work, like very broadly defined. And Bill 21 is very much in the front of our minds for March 21, the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And Quebec City is doing some sort of weird evaluation on racism in this city, systemic racism in this city. And even though the city level is not touched by this legislation because the jobs that are named are all provincial jobs, we're hoping to be able to talk about Bill 21 in the same kind of realm as that kind of work.
All right, for sure. Okay, so I guess I don't know if I have any more questions there. I guess my question would be timing. You had said 20 minutes at like 8:28. Is it something where we have a few more minutes, or is it something where basically you might want to?
We have probably time for one question.
Okay, so for sure. So the question I do actually have, and one that I'm glad we have the time to ask, is let's say people aren't in Quebec. What can they do to support the efforts resisting this Bill C-21?
I think that there's certainly calls that come, especially out of Montreal. They'll be in English, so people can kind of pay attention to those, that you can follow those calls. But honestly, like, Islamophobia looks different in every part of this country. And I think that the best way that you can be in solidarity with people in Quebec is to be really committed to fighting Islamophobia wherever you are. Right? There's been outward Islamophobic attacks happening in provinces across this country, and that needs to be resisted. And we shouldn't have to wait for an attack before we're actually organizing and finding ways to be able to push back against policy that is Islamophobic. So I kind of think that that's the best option. This is not a government that's going to receive a letter from Saskatchewan and say, like, they care what they say, right? So the kind of traditional lobbying kind of tactics from outside of the province are not really going to work. But if people are asking for money, I very much encourage you to make donations. They are selling masks that have like the 21 with the line through it. So I have those, which are cool. And I'm sure if you were interested in buying one, you can probably connect with folks in Montreal that are selling them. But really, we have to resist Islamophobia in all of its forms in this country. And if you're not actively involved in a struggle currently locally, look to see what's going on and look to see if you can make those connections with people in your community to see what you can do.
All right, for sure. Yeah, so I guess the question would be now, where can people check out you? Where can people keep an eye on your work, like social media, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I mean, for everyone in the stream that's a cop, like you already know. For everyone else, I guess like Passage is where you'll see my columns mostly. I also have a regular appearance in the Washington Post in the global opinion section, so you can find me sometimes there. And you can find me on Twitter, which is where I share a lot. And so that is Nolore, N-O-L-O-R-E. And of course, Sandy Nora is where you can hear us every week on the politics of the day, and a new episode drops every Tuesday. So that's sandynora.com.
Okay, terrific. I will actually, give me a quick second. I will see if I can get that link up into the, there we go. So that is working, and that is now in the Twitch chat. All right, so I guess if anyone hasn't basically isn't following me on Twitch or came to me through an alternate channel, my Twitter is there, basically. But yeah, you know what, Nora, thank you so much for coming on. In terms of me asking in terms of the time and such, I hope that that isn't taken as asking you to leave. I just wanted to make sure you weren't late for the podcast there. So
I appreciate that.
All right, but yeah, really thank you so much for taking the time to coming on. Basically, thank you so much to everyone for listening, and also, of course, lest I forget, as I don't want to forget, a special thank you to Sarah Jama as well, who came on to really give us a great basically breakdown of basically the dangers of the MAID bill. And that's something where I no doubt may consider even doing a live watch of that debate, actually, and see maybe if I can pull on one or two people to watch that with me, because I think that's something where actually the debates and such aren't really watched, and that might be something where this platform might actually be helpful. So
yeah, thinking about how like the Senate committee went, it probably would be, because the people who are really compelling and that you want to listen to, you'll listen to, and then the people that are obviously like, what the fuck, like there's a lot of good fodder.
All right, yeah, but yeah, like I said before, I'll give one last thank you to everyone involved with this stream tonight, and yeah, I'll catch you guys later. There's actually wait a second. There's gonna be a stream tomorrow, 4 p.m. Basically, they're Ecuadorian elections. Basically, so some big news has come up with Andres Arauz. Basically, there's obviously, I think Nora, you'd be well aware of the pink tide, and so there's a new pink tide obviously in Latin America right now. Arauz won the first round, but he didn't win enough to force it to not be able to escape a second round of voting. But now they're attempting to force a recount, even though there's no grounds for a recount. And also there's a Colombian, a right-wing, basically prosecutor who's actually flying to there to try to concoct fake charges against Arauz. So there's some real danger for Arauz and real danger for that left movement. So if you want to know more about that, get into the details, what's happening. And for goodness sakes, we know a lot more could very much happen between now and then. I am going to be having the Gray Zone News' very own Ben Norton, who's basically a tremendous writer and journalist, and someone who I've had so much respect for. Going to be having him on 4 o'clock on this very Twitch channel. So like I said before, basically, if you want to catch those future streams, definitely make sure to follow the channel. So yeah, there we go. That's the last deal. Thanks so much to everyone, and I will finally cut this live stream off. Thank you.